Hey guys, how's it going? I'm the Duke of Italy, your favorite lo-fi music YouTuber, and I swear I am wearing a regular shirt. No, this is not a robe, this is a shirt. And today we are back with something I've been looking forward to for a minute. It's another death metal part. I'm talking about some more death metal, but we're talking about brutal death metal today. One of the best subgenres in the category, one of the best subgenres in history. It's how I like my death metal. And if you don't like it like this, then I don't know. I don't know what to tell you, other than the fact that you're probably just wrong. Quick little bit of history. So we talked about Incantation a couple episodes, New York death metal, and New York kind of spawned the scene for brutal death metal with bands like Skinless, Suffocation, Mortician. Incantation helped a lot as well, and they're black metal, but Profanatica as well. Paul Ludney's band, they are particularly heavy for black metal. So New York just knew how to be way heavier than anybody else in the scene. So that's kind of helpful to know there. I don't know why, for whatever reason that is. Maybe it's because New York hardcore was also I don't know anything about hardcore punk. So that's neither here nor there. But you know what is here and is there? The first section of today's video. Now, here's my biggest criticism of this part of the chart. It divides it into technical brutal death metal, and then one more section for some reason. And the thing is, the technical brutal death metal part is way bigger than the regular brutal death metal part. Not a huge complaint, because what I'm about to show you is quite fantastic stuff. But we'll get into all that stuff. We'll talk about the albums, and then we'll mention how everything turned out. But first, we talk about technical brutal death metal with Cryptopsy, None So Vile. Yes. Yes, man. Oh my gosh. Cryptopsy's None So Vile is one of the greatest death metal albums of all time, coming from one of the best runs of albums of all time. But first, we're going to talk about something different, actually. It's not even on the chart. But there's a little album called Blasphemy Made Flesh by Cryptopsy. That's their debut album. It's a little bit more raw production, a little bit more melodic, and it's awesome. It's really great, really gross feeling. But if you want something a little bit chunkier, a little more on the side of like Suffocation, Cryptopsy's None So Vile is for you. Here's the thing. Slit Your Guts is quite possibly the best death metal song of all time. And I really mean that. The opening riff sounds like math rock, and then it ends up as one of the chunkiest, heaviest breakdowns ever. And then the original riff comes back at the end of the song. I memorized the structure because it's that amazing. Lord Worm's vocals are fantastic. The snare sound is flat and thick. It sounds like almost like a drumline sound, and the blast beats are lightning fast, as well as every other element on this album. But it has a good variety of different paces and tempos. It basically varies between like as fast as humanly possible and like the thickest, chunkiest breakdowns you've ever heard that annihilate any deathcore breakdown by so much. Because these guys actually know how to play, but they also know how to make a rhythm section stupidly heavy. I also love the way the bass is played on this album. If you're a fan of like a band like Mudvayne with that really chunky, gross bass tone, this has something kind of like that, but it's just as technical as that one guy in Mudvayne. I'm not a huge fan of Mudvayne, but the bass player is very talented. They're a technically proficient band, but they're just not fantastic songwriters, in my opinion. Cryptopsy is fantastic songwriters. The song Grave of the Father has the only breakdown in the history of breakdowns that probably ever matters ever. And if you're a fan of bands like Burzum or like atmospheric black metal that has a tendency to like be like a massage for your ears, like really good texturally, the song Phobophile is almost like the death metal equivalent of that, with just the best guitar tone ever. This album, it might actually be perfect. It is fantastic. Blasphemy Made Flesh is also fantastic and one of the best death metal albums of all time. Cryptopsy's early run is literally untouchable. This thing is great. And let me tell you, we're all going downhill from here. But not that far, because our next album is In Their Darkened Shrines by Nile. Dude, Nile is sick. And they're coming out with a new album, actually. I know Cryptopsy dropped an album last year, but I don't really need to talk about post-2000s Cryptopsy. It just seems like something I don't really need to concern myself with all that much. But Nile is a band that's kind of always been at least pretty good. In Their Darkened Shrine is a solid one, and there's only one flaw on the whole album, and it's a really long dungeon synth-esque interlude track. But other than that, the album is virtually flawless. Nile, if you don't know, has an Egypt theme to them. They have points where they have little Egyptian chords or modal Egyptian scales that they've used at a couple points, or their interlude tracks sound Egyptian. Their lyrics themes are all Egyptian, but they're also a band that is like classically trained, very proficient at their instruments. On their first album, they have Ramses, the Bringer of War, which is an interpolation of Gustav Holst's Mars, the Bringer of War from the Planet Suite. Are you kidding me right now? No, this stuff is ridiculous. I mean, we're not even talking about that album, but In Their Darkened Shrines is another beast entirely. As much as it is technical, like a band like Cryptopsy is, it also has a serious progressive nature to it. It seems to go into these various sections that all are just as entertaining as the last, just as gripping as the last, and with heavy amounts of drama and fighting and clashing. It's really interesting. But it absolutely knows when to pull back. There's a song called Sarcophagus that has this minimalist one-note riff with an equally, well, not as equally, but similarly as minimalist lead guitar on top that is so psychedelic and enthralling. It's really fantastic. The song Unas, or however it's pronounced, apologies, I don't know anything about Egypt, is 11 minutes long, and it manages to be entertaining the whole time, and it has these really awesome call and response portions that have so much flair behind them. Seriously, an intense amount of technicality and just amazement behind the whole thing. Now, while a band like Cryptopsy, specifically None So Vile, will have really flashy sort of Kerry King-esque solos that just make Kerry King look untalented, on this song here, and on other songs here, you have equally as flashy but more melodic and more like in-key solos. So if you want something a bit more streamlined and a bit more, dare I say, beautiful, Nile has it going. Also, the mixing is great. Any of the down-tuned chords are as heavy as a gunshot, so this album's great, but I would feel remiss to not mention Annihilation of the Wicked, Nile's probably best album. Definitely a better album than In Their Darkened Shrines, with a more consistent track list. Also, the final track on Annihilation of the Wicked is just one of the heaviest things I've ever heard. Also, just great, just thick, heavy blast beats for so much of it, but also amazing technicality. Nile is one of the most talented bands I've ever seen. Like, if you like Death's technicality more than a band like Cryptopsy, Nile is almost kind of in between those with an Egyptian theme as well. Certainly something I highly recommend. And up next we have Spawn of Possession's Cabinet, which is certainly technical, but this is an album that certainly has a lot to live up to compared to what we just talked about. This is an album that is not extremely brutal. I personally wouldn't even call it brutal death metal, but the main thing it goes for is way more contrast and a lot more flair in the solos and the riffs department, which on occasion works for itself, but this is an album that is so incessantly technical that it's drifting into an area of technical death metal that I do not like, an area that no longer is appealing, an area that is really only enjoyable for your first listen. It just becomes frustrating on a second. It's like, oh, look what we can count to. It's like, cool, but can you riff? Can you write something good? I had all these same complaints about the last episode. This is an album that definitely has those same complaints. It does have moments on occasion that are solidly groovy, but the thing is, it doesn't sit with them. Even a grindcore album with a 40-second song, you'll hear one riff repeat once, but this thing will have a seriously sick groove and then just break away from it way too fast. The biggest crime this album does is influence all the worst bands in the world, but as far as that style of technical death metal goes, it's not that bad. It's okay. You can tell these guys are talented, as most technical death metal bands are out there. They just don't know when to give it up, which I don't understand why that is. It feels really frustrating to listen to, and there's just no point to it. And up next, we have a band called Deeds of Flesh with Mark of the Legion, sort of like a Viking-themed thing going on here. Certainly an interesting band. So this is a cool album because it's whirling, fast, technical, and dissonant, but the technicality is a lot more subdued. It's a way that 100% uplifts the structure of the song. Their technicality is used in a way that benefits everything else. I do think there is sort of a mixing problem here. The bass feels just too low in the mix, which for brutal death metal, I'm trying to hear some bass, which makes me think this album's really not as brutal as people say it is. Not that that's a huge problem inherently, just being on this chart and all. It occasionally has some more groovy syncopation going for it, but I really wish they did it more on this album. They try to go for almost like a melodic sort of Brodequin type thing, but it just doesn't really hit on the head that well. I really want more groove or some more chunkiness, or something that sort of leads me on a bit more. But that being said, the riffiness doesn't feel like melodic death metal or anything that like makes me want to listen to it in that way as much. It's something I'm a little bit torn about. But I do love the song Spewing Profligacy. It is just disgusting. It's just as chunky and gross, and the vocals are roaring. It's a real highlight, a very, very, very strong death metal song. Easily the highlight of the album, and it goes to show that this band has a lot of talent. They just kind of don't know where to place it sometimes. While I feel like the technicality could be expanded upon just a little bit, and the brutality certainly can be, I love the energy behind this album. So I think this one's good. I think it keeps you entertained the whole time. And now, for some reason, we are outside of the technical brutal death metal section, and now we're into regular brutal death metal with a band called Morpheus Descends with Rituals of Infinity. And this is a cool one because it's very, very early when it comes to death metal. It doesn't match the rest of the scene. It has bit more of a melodic sense to it, sort of influencing bands like Brodequin, I'm sure. It's unique, though. It definitely has sort of a punky vibe to the whole thing. The bass tone is an easy highlight. Can you guys tell that I'm critiquing the bass tone a lot here? It's almost like I play the instrument or something, but it's growling and groaning, and it's got a really chunky nature to the whole thing. I love how it sounds. It's clearly very distorted, whole lot of fuzz. Sounds great. Even though it's 90s death metal production, you've got a real advantage in the mixing department here. It shows up multiple times on the album, but the track Corpse Under Glass is a great example of the extreme grooviness of this album, something that you could honestly see pulled from like Cannibal Corpse or Obituary. Honestly, I find this album to be a bit too short at just 32 minutes in length, but with this length, it has a lot of strength, no rhyme intended, with the diversity on the tracks. Every track feels decently different. Some of them have a really, really thrashy nature to them, which I guess is a good callback to the origins of death metal, or at least just a really good sense of variety in the songwriting. It's not too chunky, so it does feel a little bit different from regular brutal death metal, but the vocals and the bass tone and the grooviness make this feel like very, very solid brutal death metal. It is not an essential album in terms of the most popular stuff or the most influential necessarily, because it's one I didn't hear about until I saw this chart, but it is so unique and honestly just a banger the whole time. A really fantastic death metal album. So I give this one a great. It's one you should probably listen to, and it's a good one to bring up in conversation when people think they know more about brutal death metal than you do. And when I say I cannot believe it, I mean I cannot believe it has taken me this long to reach this album on this chart. We have reached the only brutal death metal album that truly, truly, truly matters. Not in terms of quality, even though the quality does speak for itself, but in terms of impact, this is Suffocation's Effigy of the Forgotten. New York death metal, slime and rot and sewage and disgusting stuff, and easily the most offensive lyrics I've ever read in my life. Just the absolute hatred this band has for religion is crazy to me. Like, you read black metal lyrics and you're like, oh, cool, how occult and crazy and stuff, but this stuff, it's like, wow, I feel threatened. I feel actually, like, in harm's way. That being said, it's coupled with some of the most brutal, heavy, disgusting songwriting ever. There's a reason Suffocation has lasted this long, and I love to hear that their albums are still good today. That's honestly really cool. Despite thinking of Suffocation as the quintessential brutal death metal band, and having such a caveman reputation, they have a decent amount of technicality to them. They have very solid riffs, very solid ways of weaving their songwriting. And one thing that I learned recently, especially in the mixing department, this is very important because it's kind of hard to pair all the albums on this chart in terms of like timeline, but their drummer, whose name eludes me, perfected sort of a right-hand snare blast beat where instead of doing left-hand snare and right on like your China or something like that, he had right hand on the snare. So it's like a really thick, crunchy blast beat. And he said, like, forget gating your drums. Not gating, you probably do have to gate them. Forget triggering your drums, I should say. Stop triggering your drums out there, people. You can mix your drums so they all have a little extra boost to them, but triggering them, we don't want to get rid of dynamics. Just don't do it. Don't want to have that at all. But the blast beats, heavy here naturally, even live. They're probably the heaviest blast beats around. If you think bands like Cannibal Corpse influence brutal death metal, you are certainly right when it comes to Suffocation because it has that very bouncy style at points, and it sounds amazing. The mixing on the vocals is excellent. The vocals are just growling and really deep and heavy, kind of on the Cookie Monster side that you hear people make fun of all the time, but for no good reason because it sounds great. It's crispy and it's got excellent variety, and it has the most classic breakdowns in the whole game. I hate how much Suffocation has influenced some of this every genre I don't like, but the thing is it's only because they were so incredible. Like, there's a reason they influence so much. There's a reason everyone gets called a cheap Suffocation clone. It's because Suffocation is kind of the be all end all. They are great. Me even saying otherwise feels wrong to say, but fortunately I really do feel this way. This one is truly a remarkable landmark of an album. Now, in all honesty, I think Morpheus Descends is like close in quality. Like, all these great albums are close in quality, but in terms of sheer impact, you cannot beat Suffocation. Now let's just look back at what we just talked about for those 6 albums. We talked about 2 technical brutal death metal albums, technically 3 if you want to include Suffocation, 1 regular brutal death metal album, or 2 if you count Suffocation, 2 brutal technical death metal albums, so whatever that means. And now we're on to our final section of this part of the chart, continuing in brutal death metal. Just 2 albums. So what could it be? What could it be? It's Slam. Now, Slam, I wish I hated on a little bit less, because I'm okay with bands like Devourment, and you probably thought, oh, dude, Devourment's going to be on this chart. If it covers Slam, it's going to cover Devourment. You're wrong. There's no Devourment on this chart. There's also no, I don't know, like Defeated Sanity. If you want to go technical Slam, they're kind of cool. I don't hate Defeated Sanity. I like their really brutal, almost psychedelic way of doing things. It's got like an interesting sort of, I don't know, like philosophical approach. It's kind of interesting. I like bands that approach Slam, like get so heavy, but they're like not quite Slam. Here's the part of Slam I don't like, because here's a good Slam band. Infectious Jelking, for all you out there. The band that has like the dumb adult cartoon characters on the album covers, has only made splits, samples too much hip hop and trap music. It is unapologetically stupid, but at the same time it has a few riffs. Now, regular Slam that takes itself this seriously sucks. It's a horrible subgenre. There's not a lot going for it. I love to joke about Slam all the time. It is just a minefield of hilarity, but like, you're not going to tell me like Bonginator has ever written a good riff in their life. That being said, Slam does create a very solid live show energy. It's just literal constant breakdowns, but like, it just never leaves breakdown town. It's literally a breakdown the whole time. It's like a philosophical statement to do that. That being said, Infectious Jelking, they have a couple decent sort of old school style riffs in there. Not a lot. They really don't do it a lot. I did have an open mind when it came to this section. I saved it for almost the end of this whole thing because I didn't want to listen to any of it, but I'll give my honest thoughts and prayers and opinions. Now we begin with a band called Abominable Putridity with The Anomalies of Artificial Origin. Already, a big problem I had with Slam, it's like, look at this album. It's sci-fi themed, apocalyptic even, and gory. It's like, guess what? That is half the genre of Slam, is sci-fi and gory and apocalypse themed. The other half is just like murder and death and gore. We'll get to that in a moment. That being said, I didn't hate this album. This was very technical. It had a couple breakdowns that were like extra breakdowns compared to everything else that had that really stupid bass boost sound, which sounds just terrible. I like when Infectious Jelking does it because it's so loud, it's hilarious. Which it's done as a statement against the genre, clearly. Not as good here. But that being said, this album has some decent riffs. It has a bit of a sense of humor with how technical it is, and being only 25 minutes long, it's not like I have enough time to develop a serious hatred for this thing. If you need a single Slam song that isn't by Devourment to sort of encapsulate the best parts of the genre, Burial for the Abandoned does it pretty well. I do think the whole thing is a bit overproduced. It doesn't sound like gross, but it also doesn't sound like sci-fi necessarily. There's not really any effects or anything that really leads me to that. I will say this is good workout music. It's rhythmic enough to get a good pump to, and I worked out to all these albums, so I gotta say it's like, it's okay. I don't hate it. Something you could work with a little bit. It's just, It does a lot that I don't like. Now, the next band does the other trend of the genre I hate. This is a band called Cephalotripsy or Cephalotripsy or whatever. Like, these band names are terrible. They're just like, here's another weird disease part. It's like, unless you're gore grind, I don't want to hear it, because gore grind is actually kind of sick. Let me just excuse me for a moment. This is uterovaginal insertion of extirpated anomalies. We're back into the anomalies section of titles. Skip this album. It's bad. A lot of reviews for it online are like, dude, this thing's so heavy, bro. It's so heavy and just heavy, and it has zero contrast. It doesn't even have bassy breakdowns. Like, I was hoping at some point, I'm like, this thing is just an underbite, drooling, dragging your knuckles across the floor, but not in a way that's like riffs or like energy. It's just constant bum, 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 bum. Sometimes you hear like a little whew in there, like a little pinch harmonic, but no, it's so basic it hurts. If a single riff on this album leaves the bottom two strings, I did not notice. And the first 6 frets, I almost doubt it. This thing is poor. It sucks. I want to give one caveat, though. One little caveat. I think a lot of this problem was due to the mixing. I feel like it was too compressed to do anything for me. It just lost all impact. A little too much feedback in between guitar and bass, so I didn't really feel the chunkiness of the breakdowns. Maybe if they mixed it better, I'd actually find some sort of enjoyment in this thing, but I found no enjoyment in this thing. Maybe live they'd sound better. I actually saw a YouTube video of these guys performing, and I was like, this actually sounds like, it's not played well or written well, but it sounds okay, but like the album sounds bad. So it's poor, who cares? Where is Mortician? Where is Skinless? If there's Slam, where is Devourment? Brodequin could have been included as well. I'm sure there are plenty of brutal death metal bands that I didn't even mention that should have been on this chart. Brutal death metal, you could have easily doubled what we had here. Not that I was short on things to talk about today, but I really think you could have done more on that. So I'm a little disappointed, but that being said, we had Nile and Cryptopsy and Suffocation, and having those 3, even in any section on the chart, is impressive enough. So I'm glad I covered the good technical death metal today. But yeah, that's enough on that. And I gotta get going and like stop talking about brutal death metal. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, I'd appreciate a like and a comment or a subscribe. Comments, questions, and concerns down below as well. Also, social media in the description, my Instagram, my Twitter, and my Discord page. If you want to join, talk about music, talk about some metal, talk about Blade and Drain Gang affiliates, that'd be super sick, in all honesty. And I guess that's about it. So I hope you guys doing well out there. Have a good day. Bye.